Hi, I'm Rowena. My husband said he needed space. A month later, he married my sister. She stood at their wedding in white lace, smiling like she hadn't gutted me just weeks before, looked me in the eyes and said, I deserve the happiness and the money. They didn't just take love, they stole $18 million that my father left me, forged my name, lied to my face. But I didn't scream. I waited. And on their perfect day, when she said, I do, I gave them a wedding gift so quiet, it shattered everything. What do you do when the people who raised you turn into strangers? And what would you do if the only way to get justice was to become the thing they never expected? Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you right now? Drop a comment below. You won't want to miss this story. The morning light slipped through the blinds, thin and pale, the way it always did when the fog still lingered over the bay. My apartment was quiet, too quiet for a space that had once echoed with laughter. I moved through the silence with the same routine I'd followed for years, boiling water, reaching for the jasmine tea, and pulling my father's old teapot from the shelf. The kettle's whistle cut through the air. It was sharp, then soft again, fading as I poured the water. My hand hesitated before I picked up the cup, a small white one with a fine crack along the rim. I'd promised myself to throw it away a dozen times, but I couldn't. The crack didn't bother me, it just made the cup mine. It still held warmth. The steam curled up against my face. For a second, I closed my eyes and breathed in. That scent, sweet, faintly floral, always reminded me of my father's office, of nights when he'd work late, saying, "Tea helps me think." Maybe that's why I kept drinking it. It helped me think too. But that morning, it didn't taste right. The flavor was the same, but something sat heavy beneath it, a bitterness that didn't belong. I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just the change in weather or a restless night. Still, a quiet unease had already settled in me. Daniel used to tease me about that cup. "You and your antiques," he'd say, grinning as he scrolled through his phone. "You hold on to things long past their expiration date." At the time, I thought he meant the cup. Now I wonder if he meant me. It had been a month since that dinner, the one that looked ordinary from the outside, but split something inside me open. Daniel, my husband of 8 years, sat across the table cutting into his steak. Celeste, my sister, sat beside him, all elegance and laughter. They'd always gotten along, but that night something was off. Daniel said, "You two look so much alike when you laugh." Celeste's smile widened. "Maybe we just like the same things, Daniel." Her voice carried something I couldn't quite name then. Confidence, maybe, or possession. I remember staring at my wine glass, swirling what was left, pretending to be amused. Later, when I replayed that moment, I realized Daniel hadn't looked at me once during dessert. After that, the small things began to shift. His late-night texts, the quick turns of his phone when I walked into the room. "Work emergencies," he said, always with a calm smile. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe us. Then Celeste started calling him. "Just business advice," she claimed. They both laughed about it, saying I was overthinking things. But every time her name popped up on his phone, I felt that same heaviness, the one that made my tea taste wrong. I wasn't stupid, I just didn't want to admit what I already knew. I'd been replaced before by my sister's charm, her confidence, her ability to draw light while I lingered in the quiet corners. I thought marriage would be different. When she invited us to dinner at our mother's house, I went along. I thought maybe I was imagining things, that the tension between them was all in my head. The dining room was warm with the smell of roasted chicken and wine. My mother's laughter filled the air, the kind of laughter that ignored undercurrents. Celeste poured wine for Daniel first, then for herself. Her hand hovered over my glass before she smiled. "Oh, she never drinks much anyway." Everyone laughed lightly, as if it were harmless. My mother said, "That's true. Rowena's always been the quiet one." I smiled back, small and practiced, but something inside me cracked. It was a tiny moment, so subtle it would have passed unnoticed, but it stuck. I could feel myself disappearing from my own family's table, erased by my sister's charm and my husband's silence. Later that night, I sat again with my tea. The cup looked different now. The crack seemed deeper, like it had grown. I ran my thumb along it, and it caught my skin, just enough to sting. A thin line of red appeared. Some things break so quietly, you almost miss it. I held the cup close, watching the steam curl up and vanish. The city outside my window hummed, life going on as if nothing had changed. But something had, and I knew it. The next morning, the phone rang while I was cleaning up breakfast. A lawyer's voice came through, calm and polite, asking for my signature on some old inheritance papers from my father's estate. I said I'd come by the office that week. It felt routine, something simple, unimportant. As I hung up, my phone buzzed again. Celeste's name lit the screen. I stared at it. Her smiling face, the one I'd once trusted completely, stared back at me. For the first time, I didn't answer. I set the phone down next to the cup, the same cracked one, and watched the tea ripple inside it. I didn't know it yet, but that call wasn't about my father's estate. It was about losing everything I thought was mine. I stood at the window, watching the fog roll in like a tired ghost. The call from the lawyer still echoed in my ears, but it wasn't the paperwork that left me uneasy. It was the way the air shifted afterward, like the moment right before a storm when birds go quiet and leaves stop rustling. A soft knock at the door pulled me out of my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, and Daniel wasn't due back for another hour. When I opened it, Celeste stood there, coat draped perfectly over her shoulders, hair pulled back just enough to seem casual but not effortless. She held a bottle of wine like it was an olive branch. "I thought we could have dinner," she said, with that dazzling smile people always fell for. "Just the three of us. It's been too long." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a performance, one she'd clearly rehearsed. I should have said no, should have told her I was busy or tired or simply not in the mood. But I didn't. Because if I refused, I'd look petty. And somehow, even after everything, I still wanted to keep the peace. "Sure," I said, stepping aside. "Make yourself at home." She already had. Celeste wandered through the apartment like she'd lived there once. Her heels clicked softly against the hardwood as she moved to the living room, tossing her coat on the back of the couch without asking. I watched her fingers trail across the books on the shelf. She picked up a frame of Daniel and Me at Lake Tahoe, tilted it slightly, then set it back with a crooked smirk. By the time Daniel walked in 20 minutes later, I'd already started the roast chicken. The kitchen smelled like rosemary and garlic, comforting, familiar. He greeted Celeste with a warmth that didn't belong to a brother-in-law. His eyes lit up, and I saw the shadow of guilt flicker, just for a second, when he looked at me. "Wow," he said. "This is a surprise." Celeste laughed, soft and rehearsed. "I told Ro we needed to catch up. We've all been so busy, haven't we?" Busy. That word hung in the air like smoke. I stirred the vegetables, listening as their laughter floated in from the living room. Familiar, too familiar. The kind of laughter that once belonged to me and now belonged to someone else. When I walked in with the tray, Celeste was sitting in my chair, the one with the cushion Daniel gave me on our first anniversary. She didn't look up. "Oh, I hope you don't mind, Ro," she said, already halfway into her second glass. "It's just closer to the fire." Of course she sat there. Of course she called me Ro, like we were 10 again, and I didn't see the knife hidden in her hand. I smiled because that's what I was trained to do, but inside something started to harden. We ate, we talked, Well, they talked. I nodded, refilled plates, made sure everyone had enough. That's what I'd always done, until she reached for the wine. Celeste poured for Daniel first. She smiled as she leaned in, her fingers brushing his wrist a second too long. She filled her own glass, then turned the bottle away without even glancing at mine. Daniel noticed. I saw it in his eyes. He flinched slightly, but didn't speak. Celeste smirked. I'll pour hers later. She's watching her figure. The air shifted. I felt it in my bones. I lifted my glass, empty, of course, and said lightly, "Actually, I'm watching something else disappear." No one responded. Inside, my thoughts screamed, but outside, I was still the gracious hostess. After dinner, while I cleared the plates, Celeste leaned against the counter, swirling her wine. Mind if I borrow Daniel for a minute? I just need to go over some things for the charity gala next month. Before I could answer, she was already leading him toward the balcony. I wiped my hands on a towel and tried to focus on the dishes. I didn't mean to listen. I didn't move closer. I didn't lean in. But I heard her anyway, her voice low and sharp like broken glass. She'll never sign anything unless you make it sound like it's for the family trust. Daniel's reply came smooth, practiced. I know how to handle her. Something inside me cracked. My hand slipped. The teacup I'd been drying fell to the floor and shattered into pieces. Not chipped, not cracked, broken. I stared at the fragments, my breath caught somewhere between fury and disbelief. My palm stung. I looked down to see a thin slice of red blooming where the porcelain had cut me, right along the scar that hadn't healed from before. This time, I didn't cry. I bent down, picked up each shard carefully, and placed them on the counter like they still meant something. Maybe I should stop trying to keep the peace. They came back inside, acting like nothing had happened. Celeste talked about hotel venues and color schemes. Daniel nodded, playing along. Neither of them looked at me. She left around 10, wrapping herself in that expensive coat and blowing a kiss toward Daniel as if I didn't exist. I stood in the hallway, half hidden in the shadow between the kitchen and the door, holding a piece of the broken cup. I didn't say a word. But that night, I started listening to every lie like it was music on repeat. The morning after that dinner felt too still, like the house was holding its breath. I'd barely slept. Every word, every glance from the night before, replayed in my head on a loop. Celeste's smirk, Daniel's silence. It all clung to me like humidity before a thunderstorm. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID showed the name of my father's old lawyer, Gregory Sands. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since we finalized the estate review. His tone was careful, too careful. "Rowena," he began, "we received your signed approval for the transfer of the Hale Estate holdings. I just wanted to double-check that it was really you who signed it." My stomach turned cold. "What transfer?" He hesitated. "I'll forward you the documents. You can look for yourself." I opened my laptop right there at the kitchen counter. The email came through seconds later. When I clicked the attachment, my heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. There it was, my name, written neatly at the bottom of the page, dated 2 days ago. My handwriting, almost perfect, except for one thing. The curl of the R was too smooth. I always pressed too hard on that first line. Whoever had done it knew me well enough to copy everything but the pressure of my pen. "I didn't sign this," I whispered. Gregory's voice was low, uneasy. "That's what I was afraid you'd say." I stared at the screen, the room tilting slightly as if the floor had shifted beneath me. Someone had stolen my signature. My father's estate, his legacy, was being moved, and my approval was the weapon. When the call ended, I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without even shutting off the stove. The drive to Daniel's office downtown felt longer than usual. though I barely remember the traffic lights. I rehearsed what I'd say. You used my name. You used me. I imagined the look on his face when I said it. But when I arrived, the receptionist gave me that uneasy smile people wear when they're about to deliver bad news. "He's out for the day," she said. "Client meeting." "Where?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "I think he mentioned meeting your sister for lunch." The words hit harder than I expected. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just nodded, thanked her, and walked out. The world outside looked the same, but something inside me had shifted for good. On the drive back, I couldn't stop replaying a night from months ago, the night they'd planted this trap. I'd been in the kitchen, still raw from my father's passing. Daniel had wrapped an arm around my shoulder and said, "You don't need to deal with all that legal stuff alone, babe. I can help. We'll make sure everything's in order." Celeste had chimed in, that sugary tone she used when she wanted something. "Exactly, Ro. Let us take care of it. Family helps family." Back then, those words felt like comfort. Now they sounded like a curse. By the time I got home, the sun was dipping low, painting the apartment gold. I sat on the couch staring at the faint tea stain on the carpet, the one from the first night I started suspecting them. The same spot, the same kind of ache in my chest. "I signed nothing," I said out loud. My voice echoed slightly in the quiet room. "But they think I did." I sat there for a long time, hands folded, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. And then something strange happened. I stopped shaking. Let them think I'm still asleep, I thought. It'll make waking up easier. For the first time in weeks, my mind started to clear. I went to the small cabinet in the study where I kept my father's papers. The folder was still there, thick with the original documents, his will, the seal still pressed deep into the paper. Beside it sat an old flash drive labeled in my father's handwriting, "Dinner 2019, Celeste and Dad." I hadn't looked at it since the funeral. Something in me said to plug it in. The screen flickered to life. There was my father, sitting at the table, laughing softly between bites of food. Celeste sat across from him, smiling that same perfect smile she always used when she wanted to be seen as the favorite. Then he said something that made me stop breathing. "Everything will go to Rowena," he said, voice steady. "She's the only one who never asked for anything." The video froze as tears blurred my vision. My father had seen through everything, even back then. I pressed my hand to my mouth, not to keep from crying, but to keep from screaming. By the time Daniel got home that evening, I'd locked the original will and the flash drive in a small box under the floorboard in my closet. He greeted me like nothing had changed, kissing my cheek as he scrolled through his phone. "Hey, hun, I might have to fly out tomorrow. Client trip, short notice." I looked past him, out the window. The streetlights had just come on, casting pale halos over the cars below. And there it was, Celeste's car, parked right outside. I didn't ask questions, not this time. He smiled absently, kissed my forehead, and went upstairs to pack. I stood by the window, the flash drive cold in my hand. "If they wanted a war," I whispered, "they just forgot who taught me how to fight quietly." The next morning, as the sun crept over the fog, I picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake anymore. I made my first call that morning, not to my lawyer, but to someone Daniel never thought I'd speak to again. The rain had just stopped by the time I pulled out of the garage. Gray clouds still clung to the Napa Valley hills, their gold slopes damp and glistening in the early afternoon. I drove north, leaving the city behind with its rush and chatter, trading it for quiet vineyards and the kind of stillness that forces you to hear your own heartbeat. I'd driven this road with Daniel once, when weekends actually meant something other than secrets, and it felt like a different lifetime. This time, I wasn't going for wine. I was going for truth. When the rental car turned onto the long driveway of Charles Myers' estate, I felt a brief jolt in my chest. His house stood in the middle of acres of old vines, redwood trees shading the side entrance. He had been my father's trusted friend, the steady hand behind the scenes, and now he might be the only person I could trust. Charles greeted me on the porch, wearing that gentle smile and the same soft southern drawl he always used. "Rowena, it's good to see you." But I saw the hesitation in his eyes. Years of familiarity still didn't hide the guilt. He pulled aside the door and stepped out of view for a second. When he came back, he was holding an envelope, brown, sealed, creased. Inside, I found a letter in my father's handwriting. "If this ever reaches you, it means someone tried to rewrite my legacy. Remember, justice doesn't need noise. It needs patience." The words landed on me like a cold wave. I folded the paper slowly, pressed it flat on the palm of my hand. That phrase, his voice, became a new anchor inside me. Over coffee in a drawing room filled with photographs of our family, Charles said it plainly. "Daniel came to me months ago, wanted me to draft a clause to simplify the inheritance. I refused, but someone else clearly didn't." My mind traced back to every lunch, every helping hand, every look I ignored. The betrayal was no longer shadows, it was real. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask to see bank statements, yet. Instead, I leaned across the table and said evenly, "I'm not looking for war. I'm looking for clarity." My tone surprised me as much as it surprised him. I was done pretending the cracks were just in the teacup. Something had shifted. That evening, I sat in his study, as dusk settled and the vineyard lights began to sparkle like distant stars. And I opened my laptop. Charles introduced me to Amira Chen, a cybersecurity expert tucked away in the city, and we began piecing together the proof. Daniel's offshore account, Celeste's not-for-profit shell, the legal firm quietly registered under Moore Financial LLC. I saved them in a digital folder grayed out in my mind, wedding gift. As I erased traces of doubt, that childhood memory resurfaced. The year I turned 12, Celeste was the darling of the household, bright, accomplished, never asked to help clean up spills or dry off tears. I remember standing in the hallway, hearing my mother say, "Rowena will never be the star, but she'll make a good helper." I didn't cry then, I just listened, and I believed. All my life, I played the role of the peacemaker, the background. Maybe it was time I wrote my own script. On the drive back to San Francisco later that night, the hills melted into darkness and the headlights streaked across the empty road. I held my father's letter in my lap. I didn't feel like the sister who had sat quietly at family dinners. I felt like someone awakening. I whispered into the void, "Patience, fine, but I won't wait quietly." When I got home, I sent the text, "We need to talk about Dad's estate. Dinner tomorrow." I watched the send icon spin, and I thought of the table at Mother's house, the one where I wasn't even offered wine, the one where I sat while they bolstered each other's stories. I wasn't inviting Daniel for closure, I was setting the table for war. As twilight settled over the city, the apartment felt too polished. Everything in its place, 3 plates set at the dining table, cutlery aligned like soldiers preparing for battle. I leaned back against the countertop, sipping water instead of tea, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. That place we called home was quiet again, eerily so. My notes from the meeting in Napa were tucked away in the drawer. The letter from Dad was sitting next to the cracked cup on the shelf, and I could feel that old habit of pretending things were fine beginning to crumble. Old habits die hard, I thought, even when you've buried the people they belong to. The door clicked open, and Daniel walked in. Tie straight, jacket slung on one shoulder, that same confident smile I remembered from better days. He greeted me with a hug as if nothing had changed. I felt nothing in return. "Smells great," he said as he hung his coat. "Like you found a new chef." "Thought we'd keep it simple tonight," I replied, holding the wine bottle for him. I could hear the clink of glass in the living room as he poured himself a drink. Then Celeste's voice came softly through the speaker across the hall. "Hi, everyone," she said. "I hope I'm not late." She appeared at the threshold, in that dress she wore on our family photos. Beautiful, calm, sure. My heart tightened. She brought a bouquet, white lilies, and placed them on the table with a smirk I refused to acknowledge. Silence stretched for a moment as I offered her the third chair. "It's been too long," she said quietly. "We really should get together more." Daniel nodded, took his glass, and glanced at me. "Yeah," he said, "it's nice to do this." I sat down. My eyes flicked to the third plate, poised but empty at first. My mind was calm, my tone even as I asked, "So, how's everything with work, Celeste?" "It's going well," she said. She glanced at him, then back at me. "Daniel's been helping me with some project initiatives. Very exciting." I forced a smile. My plate arrived, and I thanked the chef, a reference Daniel used to make when we first moved in together. Now it felt like an irony too sharp to ignore. Over the next few minutes, conversation buzzed about autumn leaves and weekend plans. Things people who still pretended life was normal would say. Then Daniel slid a stack of documents across the table. "I want us to talk about Dad's estate," he said. My fork paused in midair. He kept his voice low. "I think for tax purposes, it might be better if Celeste managed the transition." Something in me cracked. The corners of his mouth flicked, waiting for reaction. I looked at him coolly. "So you forged my name to make it easier?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the table. I just said it. He came up with something. "Rowena, I don't know what you're talking about." His face went pale. Celeste shifted, gently folded her arms, her eyes kind of dance rough, almost like she'd won before the game began. "I have the screenshot," I said, "with your login, with your timestamp." I pulled my phone from my bag and tapped the screen. The metadata glowed on the display. The room seemed to lean closer. His voice cracked. "This is insane. You've got it wrong." "And you agreed," I said quietly, "because it worked for you." Suddenly, his tone snapped. "You never appreciated what I did for us. You just existed." My heart clenched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply said, "I built everything you touched." His chair scraped back. He stood, his arms raised, searching for air. "You're making accusations." "I'm telling you the truth," I answered. "What you did wasn't business, it was betrayal." He turned, stormed out. Celeste watched him go, lips parted, face regulated like nothing happened. Mother glanced toward the door from her seat and didn't speak. I felt the weight of all of them collapsed on the table. Daniel's car peeled out of my driveway earlier than expected. The lilies sat wilted next to the finished dinner. I cleaned each plate, including the empty third one, set for a person no longer us. I rinsed them and polished them. I didn't move the lilies. They would stay and serve as a reminder. My voice whispered through the quiet kitchen. My father used to say silence was strength. But sometimes silence is a wound that never closes. Maybe it was time I learned to make noise. Then I pulled the cracked cup from the shelf. It came down in my hand, its fracture deeper than ever. I placed it over the sink and smashed it. The porcelain shattered, pieces scattering like broken promises. A shard cut my palm, just like before, but I didn't wince. "I wasn't breaking the cup," I said. "I was breaking the habit of keeping quiet." That night, I sat at the desk, the folder labeled wedding gift open in front of me. I pressed play on Dad's voice recorded years ago, faintly behind laughter, behind candles and wine. His voice, Justice doesn't need noise, it needs patience. His words filled the room. I smiled, soft and steady, and whispered, "Patience ends at their wedding." I hadn't been going to the ceremony for comfort. I was going for closure. No, not closure. I was going for change. The next morning, before the sun had even touched the skyline, I was already awake. The city outside my window was all slate gray and sleeping. There was no sound but the occasional sigh of traffic 5 stories below. I didn't feel tired or angry or anything like I used to. I felt aligned. For years, I thought staying quiet meant I was in control. But control, I'd come to learn, wasn't about silence. It was about timing. And I wasn't waiting anymore. I dressed without rushing, pulled my coat over a sweater, took the flash drive from my desk drawer, the one labeled wedding gift, and slipped it into the side pocket of my purse. No makeup. Just my father's words echoing in my chest like a compass. Justice doesn't need noise, it needs patience. By 8 o'clock, I was walking into a quiet cafe in Pacific Heights. Charles was already there, nursing a black coffee and reading over papers in that way only retired lawyers still do, half legal, half personal guilt. "Didn't think you'd sleep," he said, not looking up. "I didn't," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He sighed and finally met my eyes. "You're walking into fire, Rowena." "Good," I said. "They won't see me through the smoke." He half smiled, then nodded toward the back table, where a woman in a burgundy scarf was working over 2 laptops. "That's Amira Chen. She owed me a favor. You're lucky I saved it." I walked over and sat next to her. She didn't look up, just said, "You're the sister, the one who didn't touch the money." "Until now," I said. Amira got right to it. Her fingers moved fast over the keyboard, and within minutes, she was showing me screenshots, offshore accounts, wire transfers under shell company names. One of them, More Development Fund, linked directly to Celeste's so-called charity, the Hale Foundation for Women in Business. Amira smirked. "Your sister's been quite the philanthropist. Only her #1 donor is herself. And Daniel? Half owner in everything. They thought moving it offshore would hide it. But..." She handed me a USB drive. "This makes it all public if you want it to." I looked down at it. 1 ounce of plastic. 3 years of betrayal compressed into proof. "It's not for public yet," I said. "Not until it hurts." After coffee, Charles and I walked to his office nearby. It was small, private, mostly filled with old law books and dusty sunlight. He pulled out a folder from a locked drawer. "Revocation of power of attorney," he said. "Quietly filed, activated the moment they move any more funds." "And it'll hold?" I asked. "As long as no one tips them off. Once they make another withdrawal, it's fraud. Full stop." I signed. My hand didn't shake. Charles looked at me for a long time. "You don't have to keep doing this alone." I nodded. "I'm not alone. I'm just not catching them this time." Back home, after a short walk from the bus stop, I placed the USB Amira gave me in the same drawer with the original will. Then I opened the video again, Dad's last dinner. I'd watched it too many times already, but this time I listened differently, focused on the background. At minute 12, Celeste's voice floated out between laughter and clinking silverware. "Ro will never fight us," she said, clear as crystal. "She doesn't know how." I paused, rewound, played it again. My father's voice followed just a few seconds later. "Everything will go to Rowena. She's the only one who never asked for anything." I added captions. "Let the words repeat. Justice doesn't need noise. It needs patience." The file saved under a new name, their wedding gift.mp4. Then I shut the laptop. Later that afternoon, I wandered into a thrift store I hadn't been in since before Daniel proposed. No goal, just instinct. That's when I saw it. A pale blue dress, vintage, soft fabric, simple lines. Nothing Celeste would wear, which made it perfect. The cashier looked confused when I handed it over. "Occasion?" she asked. I smiled. Closure. It wasn't meant to dazzle. It was meant to remember. The color matched my father's old teacup, the one I'd smashed after dinner. Something broken, made beautiful again. As I stepped out, the clouds were breaking. The sun started to pour down the sidewalk in long gold lines. That night, just as I was making tea, I got the email. Subject line, final confirmation, wedding day logistics. I almost laughed. It was from Celeste. She'd CC'd me by accident. Or maybe she hadn't. Maybe she was still underestimating me. I whispered to myself as I clicked open my laptop, "You invited me after all." I opened YouTube, set their wedding gift MP4 to schedule, upload date, their wedding ceremony, exact hour, public. I clicked confirm, and then I just sat back. By the time she said "I do," everyone would know exactly what she'd done. The drive to the vineyard felt like moving through a memory I didn't belong in anymore. The hills rolled out like they had for decades, quiet and golden. Rows of grapevines reached toward the sun, oblivious to the storm I was bringing. I kept the windows rolled down. The wind smelled of lavender and money. Too clean, too curated, just like Celeste's life. I parked half a mile from the estate, out of sight from valet attendants and wandering photographers. The heels I wore weren't built for gravel, but I made each step count. I wasn't walking in for drama, I was walking in for history. The pale blue dress fluttered softly around my knees, the same color as the teacup that used to sit on my father's desk, the one I'd shattered without regret. "They didn't expect me to come," I whispered to myself. "They never expect the quiet ones to show up." From the edge of the lawn, I could see everything. Long tables under white canvas tents, champagne towers catching the sunlight, and Daniel and Celeste posing like royalty. He looked stiff, like his suit didn't quite fit. She, of course, was glowing, always was in a spotlight. Their mother, Eleanor, stood off to the side, clasping a mimosa and beaming like she'd just won the lottery. Maybe she had, until today. "There's a strange peace," I said softly, "in watching your own past celebrate its funeral." Guests flowed through the space like choreographed dancers. Some faces I recognized from childhood. A few turned when they noticed me, but said nothing. I was the ghost at the party, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A young server approached me hesitantly, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres. "Miss Hale, should I announce you?" I smiled gently. "No, I'll announce myself." I drifted toward the outer edge of the tent, behind the rows of chairs set up for the ceremony. From that vantage point, I could see them perfectly. Daniel, fidgeting with his cufflinks, and Celeste, checking her reflection in the back of a spoon. She really was beautiful, but beauty didn't mean truth. The officiant called the room to order. "We gather today to celebrate a union built on love." I tuned him out. My eyes stayed fixed on the screen behind the altar, mounted for the planned slideshow of their love story. What they didn't know was that their slideshow had been replaced. As the vows began, Celeste gripped Daniel's hands and smiled wide. "I deserve the happiness and the money," she said aloud, to giggles from the crowd. They thought it was part of the speech. The officiant smiled awkwardly. "And now you may exchange vows." The screen behind them flickered. First black, then sound, then truth. My father's voice filled the tent. "Everything will go to Rowena. She's the only one who never asked for anything." Gasps. The crowd turned. Then came the rest. Daniel's login screen, the forged documents, audio of Celeste at that dinner. in 2019. Roe will never fight us. She doesn't know how. You could feel the air get sucked out of the tent. Laughter froze. Faces turned. Celeste's grip on Daniel's hand dropped. His eyes locked on the screen like it might burst into flames. Their mother dropped her glass. It shattered, loud and sharp. That's fake, Celeste stammered. It's edited. But in the bottom right corner of the video, the watermark glowed. Verified source, legal copy, courtesy of Amira. Daniel stepped back. His face was blank, drained of color, sweat breaking along his temples. Celeste, he mumbled, almost inaudible. She was too busy looking for someone to blame, but all she found was herself, in high definition. Their mother fainted. I stood still near the back, just inside the tent, mostly hidden. A few guests had realized who I was. One of them whispered my name, but I didn't respond. I wasn't here to make a speech. The truth had already spoken. I didn't ruin their day, I said, more to myself than anyone. They just invited the truth to dinner. Slowly, I made my way to the front table where the wedding cake towered like a monument to delusion. I placed a small box on the white linen beside it. Wrapped in soft paper and tied with a silver ribbon, it was the size of a teacup, because it once had been. Inside was the broken shard from the teacup I'd smashed weeks ago. Polished, clean, resting gently next to a handwritten note. It still holds warmth, just not for you. I turned and walked away. Behind me, someone called out, "Wait, Rowena?" But I didn't turn. Celeste would open that box. She would see the piece. She would read the note, and she would understand. You don't get to shatter someone and expect silence in return. I walked out of the tent, past the vineyard, through rows of vines that bent gently in the wind, like they knew what had happened, like they'd seen this kind of thing before. My father's voice played once more in my head, like it had been waiting for this moment. Justice doesn't need noise. But I whispered something back this time. It deserves witnesses. I didn't go home that night. I went somewhere my family would never follow. A modest roadside inn just outside Napa, where the sheets were thin but clean and the front desk didn't ask for a last name. I lay in bed with my shoes still on, staring at the ceiling fan making lazy, useless turns. At dawn, I slipped out before the sun touched the hills. No makeup, hair tied back. My purse only carried one thing that mattered. The manila folder labeled Estate Motion. Hail v. Hail. I parked outside the courthouse and sat for a while, watching the morning fog melt off the vineyard rows in the distance. It was the first quiet I'd felt in years. When the noise fades, the silence sounds different. It doesn't hurt anymore. It just means it's over. I stepped inside the courthouse like I'd done it 100 times before, even though I hadn't. But grief and betrayal make you memorize unfamiliar territory fast. Charles was already there, in a charcoal suit, eyes clearer than I'd seen them in weeks. He gave me a small nod and led me into a side office, away from the public courtroom. "It's done," he said, sliding the documents across the desk. The injunction went through overnight. Their accounts are frozen. The video's been logged as legal evidence. Investigators are already circling. I nodded, signing my name with a hand that didn't shake anymore. "They're going to lose everything they tried to steal," Charles added. "I know," I replied. Then I looked him in the eye and said, "I want half of it donated." His brow lifted. "To who?" "To women," I said. "Specifically, women who've had to rebuild their lives after men like Daniel, after sisters like Celeste, after betrayals that come dressed as family." He paused. "You sure?" "It's not charity," I said. "It's redistribution." Charles smiled faintly, and we didn't say another word. Some victories don't need confetti. They just need a signature. When I stepped out into the sunlight, I almost didn't see her at first. Celeste was standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps, still in her bridal heels, a beige coat thrown over her gown. Her makeup had smudged and dried like watercolor paint. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse, and on her left ring finger, the diamond still gleamed. "You humiliated me," she said, voice hoarse. I didn't blink. "No, you did that yourself." She tried to gather herself. Her eyes darted, looking for sympathy she wouldn't find. "Daniel said you wouldn't fight, that you were too soft." "He was half right," I said. "I used to be." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I didn't mean, I was trying to survive." "You knew exactly what you were doing," I said softly. "You just didn't think I'd ever stop letting you get away with it." Celeste's face cracked. I saw it, not just the tears, but the truth finally pressing on her like a stone wall. Her shoulders sagged. She reached out. "I'm sorry," but I didn't take her hand. "You'll carry that," I said. "I'm done." And I walked away. Later that evening, Charles stopped by my apartment. He carried a simple white envelope. No return address, no stamp. He held it like it was heavier than it looked. "From Daniel," he said, "delivered by courier." I didn't open it right away. I made tea. I lit a candle. And then I sat by the window and read every word. It wasn't long. He admitted to the forgery, the betrayal. He said he was afraid of being ordinary, of being left behind. He thought Celeste was his lifeline, his chance at legacy. "You always deserved more than I could give," the letter ended. I didn't cry. I folded the letter, lit a match, and dropped it into the old cup I once bled into. The same one I'd kept, cracked but whole. The flames curled the paper into ash. The past turned into smoke. I used to think forgiveness meant forgetting. Now I know it just means I'm not carrying the weight anymore. The next morning, I drove up to the cemetery before the sun had fully climbed. I didn't bring flowers, just a small silver pendant I'd had engraved. I placed it gently at the base of my father's headstone. "Justice doesn't need noise. It needs patience," the engraving read. Beside it, I laid a note. Patience served its time. A breeze swept through the grass and made the trees whisper like they were exhaling. I closed my eyes. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel broken. I felt released. As I walked back toward my car, the sky turned amber above the hills, like something was finally letting go of its hold on me. They thought they buried me in silence, but silence was just the soil. I grew there. And now it's time to plant something new. The Monterey coast doesn't ask questions. It just hums. Low, steady, indifferent to who I used to be. That's what I came for. Not peace, exactly, but permission. Permission to exist outside of the storm. It's been 3 months. My little cottage, perched on a slope that catches the morning fog just right, is small enough to feel like a secret. White walls, a desk with nothing but a mug of mint tea, a leather-bound notebook, and a photo of my father, the one where he's laughing without realizing anyone's watching. The ocean whispers through the cracked window. The scent of eucalyptus drifts in at night. Monterey smells like salt and eucalyptus. I came here to remember who I was before the noise, before their names filled every room I entered. I write every morning, not for a book, not for an audience, just words, quiet ones. I let them fall from my pen like old leaves. Some mornings I wake up with nothing to say, and that's okay too. I've learned that silence isn't emptiness. Sometimes it's just rest. A week ago, I received an email from a woman in Idaho. She'd read my story in a local paper and found me through the foundation. Her sister emptied their shared account. Her husband blamed her for it. She said she didn't know where to begin again. Today, I wrote her back. They can take your money, your name, even your history. But they can't take your quiet. Guard it. That's where your power lives. I sealed the envelope and walked it to the old green mailbox down the street. Funny how full circle that felt. My father once sent me his last letter from a post office just like this. Now it's my turn, not to close something, but to open it for someone else. The Hale Trust for Women's Renewal now has a modest team, just 5 people, working out of a borrowed office space in Oakland. Charles handles the legal side. Amira checks in with cybersecurity updates. I fund it, but I don't run it. I didn't want a board seat, didn't want plaques or events or donor dinners. I had my 15 minutes of exposure, I told them. I don't need fame, I need function. And function, it turns out, is the quieter kind of glory. Some nights I fall asleep reading grant applications from women starting fresh. A bakery, a mobile hair salon, a secondhand bookstore with a side shelf just for divorce recovery guides. Every check I sign feels like a small rebellion, like rewriting the ending I never got. Then, 2 weeks ago, just after sunset, there was a knock at my door. I opened it slowly. Celeste stood there, thinner than I remembered, with her hair pulled back in a low ponytail. No makeup, no diamonds, just a plain navy sweater and worn jeans. She didn't look like someone who'd come to reclaim anything. "I'm not here to fix things," she said, before I could speak. "I just came to say I'm sorry, not for what happened, but for who I became." She looked older, not in years, but in ways that cost more than time. I didn't feel angry. I searched for it, that familiar heat in my chest. It wasn't there. I stepped aside. We sat on the porch. I poured her some water. We didn't talk much. When she stood to leave, she said, "I hope you're happier now." I nodded. "I hope you become someone else." She didn't cry. Neither did I. She walked down the path, back into the dusk. I watched until she disappeared. That was enough. This morning, I woke up early. The fog hadn't lifted yet, but I brewed some tea and carried it outside. The cup I used was new. Porcelain, white, rimmed in soft blue. Not perfect. There's a hairline crack along the handle that I keep meaning to fix. But it holds. The old cup broke. This one isn't perfect either. But it holds. I sat there on the worn wooden bench facing the tide, the salt air clinging to my sleeves. The waves rolled in, not dramatic, just steady, like a heartbeat I could lean into. People think justice is a verdict, a sentence, a loud, slamming gavel. But sometimes justice is this: a woman drinking tea by the ocean, and no one left to apologize to. I don't live in their story anymore. I live in mine. And this time, I'm the one writing the vows. To myself.